Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Strange Appalachia. We want to thank everybody for sticking with us these last few months. I know we've been sort of hit or miss. We're hoping to get back on a regular schedule here. Still got some basketball and other stuff popping up, making it hard to get these done. But we're going to try to get onto a regular schedule of doing an episode every couple of weeks or so. So we're hoping to get into that routine and go from there. But tonight's episode, we've got something that's sort of near and dear to the hearts of a lot of people across the country, especially if you're anywhere near coal mining country. And that's the legend of the Tommyknocker, or as they were originally called, just the Knocker. So you want to pick up there, Charlie?
Yeah, so the way this legend originally works is that the Knockers were seen as one of the fairy folk or one of the fae folk, and they were seen as spirits that were helpful kind of around the household. They liked milk or buttermilk and whiskey, and so if you left them presents, they would supposedly do chores around your house. Nobody ever really saw them, but they would do things like wash your dishes if you had dishes left over. They may fold clothes, simple repairs on, holes in your pants or holes in your shoes. They may repair, things like that. So the other thing they would do though is they would report danger, and they would do this by knocking on a surface, and that's where the name comes from, the knocker. And so when you flash forward about 2,000 years or so, the Irish immigrants coming into America, they Scottish too. They really preferred, or they really liked to settle in areas that reminded them of home, and the Appalachians are one of those areas. You get some rolling hills, some mountains, and so they brought these legends with us. And so that brings us to the more modern interpretation of a Tommyknocker, which is a spirit that is helpful in a mine, and supposedly they would lead lost miners to the surface if of course something had happened, they got lost underground.
Yeah, the version of it that I heard was, it was sort of a debate between whether they were a spirit or a fairy, like you were talking about there, or a gnome-like being, just some short entity that lived in these mines. But same thing, they would knock to let miners know that there was some kind of an impending danger, some maybe buildup of gas, stuff like that. Um, so yeah, they're sort of a very interesting thing because we're talking about this in the context of the Appalachian Mountains and these immigrants that came over, but this phenomenon is really countrywide, and even I would almost say even a little more prevalent as you go farther west, which is where a lot of the gold mines and stuff are. Uh, but even in the like I said, their stories are common across the entire United States. It's not just one area, even though we're like I said, we're looking at it in the context of the Appalachian Mountains. And the other weird thing that you'll find is there's sort of a flip side of the coin. We've talked about them being sort of helpful and leading miners out. The flip side of that coin is there are some miners that believe these Tommyknockers are evil entities and or evil creatures, and they're the ones that cause these mining accidents. And you just hear their axes picking at a support beam or whatever. And some people take that as a warning that bad things are about to happen, and other people take it as a warning that there are these things with bad intent that are in that mine trying to do harm to the miners. Although I would say about 80% of the stories that you hear are they have a good connotation with them or a good nature associated with them. There are a few out there where these Tommyknockers are evil or bad creatures.
Yeah, and even the ancient legends, the older legends, they say that if you ever made these things mad or you didn't appease them, then they could be really mischievous. And that mischief, it can go into outright homicide where they would drop a roof on you or drop a barn on you at the wrong time. You know, every story you get of any type of fae or fairy is they're fickle. You know, you don't know really what to expect from them. And
Right.
so,
Now, there are several stories I found of them pulling pranks, maybe stealing a miner's lunch, hiding their tools around somewhere, touching them, knocking hard hats off, stuff like that. So those are very common stories that you hear with these things.
yeah, and a lot of times people will see something. Um, I know that the column of fire is one, a ball of light, a glowing face. There's one that where the guy said that he followed a silhouette of a woman that was bright. Sometimes uh, sometimes people say it's the ghost of miners that have died that are leading people out. So there's a lot of folk tales that are associated with this that go into other realms or could be other beings.
Yeah,
They're
the
almost they're almost like gremlins sometimes.
right. I've seen a couple where some of the things that'll set them off into their more mischievous mode falls into other superstitions that come from, not necessarily the Tommyknocker story, but old superstitions where women shouldn't be allowed in mines. If you had a woman go into a mine, it would upset the Tommyknockers. Especially if she was redheaded. For some reason, they didn't like redheaded women in mines.
Yeah,
So that was one that I found in a couple of different places that Tommy Knockers would play more pranks if you brought women, especially redheaded women, into the mine.
yeah. I read one something about musical instruments. You're not
Right.
supposed to,
Yes.
and you know why in the world you would have musical instruments in a mine? I don't know, but apparently they didn't appreciate that. But that once again, that's stories that are associated with the Fae. A lot of those stories say they don't like certain types of music or certain types of musical instruments. Bells seem to be really unpopular, although those are used in mines pretty often as signaling devices.
Right. I was just reading over a couple other things that I made notes of here. One interesting thing that sort of has nothing to do with the legend at all. There is a Stephen King book and maybe even a movie called The Tommyknockers.
Yep.
And interestingly enough, it has really nothing at all to do with the same legend that we're talking about here. In his
Yeah.
novel, they're instead of being gnome-like beings or fairy or spirits of any kind, they're aliens. So that's sort of off the wall, but that's sort of Stephen King for you. Most of his
Yeah. The
stuff
movie
is all over the place.
the movie was the same way. You kind of could you could be in the book. You could be demons as well. I'm not really sure how they connect to the Dark Tower either, but you
Yeah.
know,
Well, they're there somehow.
yeah, yeah. His book. I never read the book. The movie is it was good in the '90s. That doesn't mean anything now though. But I
Right.
remember watching it when I was in the '90s when I was growing up, and I remember enjoying it. I remember watching every. It was like a mini series. I remember watching every episode of it. So it must have been something intriguing about it.
That's fair. Um, like I said, I did a lot of searches trying to find specific mine stories from the Appalachian region, but there's a lot of reports of these things. But as far as having any like actual mine named the in the story, I couldn't find any direct first person stories or anything. Did you come up with anything better?
Not for the area. I know some stories that I heard about growing up. One of them was actually in England, and supposedly the guy went on. Granted, it was on. There used to be an old show called Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, and he interviewed a guy on that show, or had a guy on the show that was interviewed. And this guy had saw one of these things and took a pretty substantial pay cut so he wouldn't have to go back underground anymore because it,
Hmm.
it scared him that bad. And I remember that story sticking in my head. And then, I've read a lot of books growing up, of ghost books and things like that. And all of them had stories about Tommy knockers in them, but they were all generic stories. You never got, any specific mine. and all the names were very common names like John and Mary. So, it's a legend in the area, but it almost seems to be almost like an urban legend where a friend of a friend of a friend saw one.
Yeah, well, I've talked with several miners over the years. I mean, we live in a coal mining community, so proportionately, this is a very small group of miners that I've talked to. But I've had them tell me stories about hearing knocking in places there shouldn't be. Um, but just going back in my memory, picking any one person that's told me that story out of all the miners I've ever met, or what mine they were in when they heard that. I couldn't do it, but I know I've heard several people over the years talk about just weird noises or weird lights that they hear or see underground while they're working, doing whatever. So I've heard those stories, maybe not necessarily associated with the word Tommy knocker, but just people talk about strange noises, strange lights.
Yeah, mines are always seen as, really mysterious. And, growing up in the community, we're always told to stay away from them unless you're a miner. Don't go near old mine sites because of all the bad things that can happen on them. So, they get a mystique about them.
Absolutely. And there's the strictest possibility out there that some of this is hallucinations of some kind. There's a lot of things psychological, and there's uh, you know different gases and stuff that'll build up in minds over time that could be causing people to see this. And like I said, just the psychological side of it, of being underground, and knowing that you're there. I mean, there's one way in and one way out a lot of times, and if something happens, then you're stuck there. And psychologically, that's got to even the people that are super comfortable with that idea, that's still got to weigh on them psychologically somewhat. And that could be a response to that. It could be just a psychological sort of coping mechanism, maybe.
Yeah,
Who knows?
people see a lot of strange things underground. And it could be something as simple as methane, you
Hmm.
know. But at the same time, there's so many safety precautions in place for the last 20 or 30 years in mining that you would think that a methane discharge or something like that would be seen with a monitor of some sort, before it became that bad.
Right. And who knows, maybe with the safety upgrades, that might have some impact on the lessening of the Tommyknocker myth. Maybe the mines are, number one, either safer now and Tommyknockers aren't needed as often to warn of danger, or two, like you're talking about, there's not as much methane buildup that goes undetected, so people aren't having that reaction as often. So that goes two ways there, but you know who knows?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting phenomenon. I kind of fascinated at how far it spread. You know, it spread from Ireland, England, that area all the way across the ocean and from one side of America to the other.
And down into Mexico and up into Canada. I
Yeah,
mean,
so
it's literally anywhere there's a mine, there is likely a local Tommyknocker story of some kind.
so it's a pretty fascinating story. It's a pretty fascinating phenomenon. Personally, I like to think it's real. I like to think there really is something, going on in the mines that's truly supernatural. I myself have never experienced anything like that. I've never heard any strange knocking from a mine or from a cave I've been in.
I was going to
The cl-
say I've never necessarily been in a mine. I've been in several caves, and like you said, never had any any strange happenings while I was in there, other than the fact that my fat tail end was in a cave.
And they're pretty boring places.
They can be, especially like I said. Now that I'm not as skinny as I used to be, there's a lot of places in those caves that I'm never going to get to ever again.
So we're gonna wrap it up now, man. You got this.
Yeah, I think it's that's all I've got, unless you've got anything else.
All right, we've covered it, I think.
All right. Well, guys, as always, I want to invite you all to leave us your thoughts. Let us know what you think about this on our Facebook page or on our YouTube channel here. Give us a like and subscribe if you haven't already, if you like what you hear. If you haven't listened to any of our other stuff, go check us out. Let us know what you think, and we hope to hear from you. If you've got any strange occurrences, any weird stuff going on, any stories you've got, especially if you'd like, or if you're okay with being interviewed, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. We've got a couple of investigations planned for, here in the coming months when we get a weekend free that we can go do that. So, give us ideas. If there's anything that you'd like to hear us talk about, let us know. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, take it easy, everybody.